You are tuning into Thriving While Black, the podcast. And this is my co-host, Casey Patterson, who is the founder and chief architect of Social Good Solutions. She is a philanthropist. She is equally creative and beautiful, loves to uplift Black women and create space and opportunity, but also to create wealth for Black women. She is a competitor. She is an athlete. She ain't scared of nothing. She believes in dreaming big, and she invites others to dream big. She is a loyal friend and is rocking all her Black girl magic all the time, and a little bit of fashionista too. Casey Patterson.
Well, thank you, Felicia. This is Felicia Jones, my co-host for Thriving While Black, the podcast. Felicia is the managing director of programs and operations for Social Good Solutions. She is an organizer, a mother, an incredible strategist. She is a loyal friend. She is a creator. She can make a bomb charcuterie board. Wow. She likes to laugh and have fun. She is a great tag-along for a road trip, a great conversationalist.
Oh my goodness.
She's a singer. She is a worshiper.
Yes.
She is full of joy and laughter, but will also show you what time it really is.
Okay.
If you try to mess around and act like you don't know.
Hey, South Central all day.
All
every
day.
We continue our conversation with founder and president of California Calls, Anthony Thigpen.
It certainly feels like you still see a multiracial democracy as achievable and something that you're hopeful about. But is there anything that worries you about that right now, and whether or not we truly can achieve it and what it will take?
Yeah, there are a few things that do worry me. First, let me just say I'm still hopeful.
Okay.
And people
That's
ask
good.
me all the time, particularly young organizers, well, how can you say hopeful after all these years?
Right.
And there's a few things. One is that I've always believed from way back in the day that humanity has the productive capability so that nobody should be hungry, nobody should have to worry about housing. Those things should be taken care of. So that's materially possible, even though that's not the social and political relationships for that right now. So it's possible, it's the first thing. The second thing is, that in the arc of history, we've come a long way. We in the crisis of the moment, we forget how far we've come and what we've built. And there are lots of dynamic organizing and community efforts that are building on that arc of history. What worries me is the number of people who embrace white supremacy and want to turn back the clock. I mean, I thought maybe it's 20% of the population, maybe 25%, but the numbers are worrisome of people who want to go back to the old days, which is white supremacy. And the second thing is the serious efforts on the part of the ultra-right and to establish minority rule or fascism. And sometimes I think that we meaning our communities and our movement, don't take that quite seriously enough. And so I don't think we take the seriousness of our opponents as serious as we should.
Wow. I think it's interesting that you talk about opponents. And I can say that one of the things that you've pioneered about the power map is really being able to plot and understand the opponents. And also thinking about how integrated voter engagement really has helped to evolve our ability to organize power very meaningfully. When you crafted these tools and brought them into scope, and now they're used by organizers, I've had the privilege of using the tool. What was missing from the ecosystem? What did you feel like this was? Clearly, it was going to help with opposition, but what else were you hoping for? What did you think this was going to address? And how should we still be thinking about that tool as a tool that we should be using in our organizing and strategy?
Sure. So a couple of things. The first thing that was a condition that we tried to address through the development of the power analysis tool was reactive tactical thinking. Particularly because our communities were always under attack. We tended to think one step at a time and just react, and not thinking about in a more systematic, analytical way the power we're up against, our potential power, and how do you create that, if not, for lack of a better word, a chessboard that we can win. So one was trying to challenge the culture of reactive and tactical thinking. The second was, which was related, being issue siloed. So we saw each other as housing advocates or healthcare advocates, education advocates, and we diminished our power by being in silos. And also seeing each other as competitors. So one of the critiques we have of community organizing was that we tended to see each other as competitors, and we were trying to build our own individual empire, not a movement. So it's very conscious in terms of developing the power analysis methodology, was seeing each other as potential colleagues, not competitors. And that if we really want to build transformative change, that's not going to happen through any one of us building an empire. It will never be big enough, it will never be powerful enough to achieve what we want to achieve. That can only be achieved through movement building and building alliances as colleagues.
So, Anthony, tell us about integrated voter engagement. We hear the terminology, and those who are involved with California Calls are trained in it. They understand what the methodology is. But for listeners who are new and who are meeting you for the first time, what is integrated voter engagement? What is power analysis? What are these tools of which we speak?
Sure. So integrated voter engagement was an attempt to bring together two aspects of power building that oftentimes are at odds. So one was community organizing. You're building a base of people, you do advocacy, direct action, to win change. And typically that didn't involve anything in the electoral arena. On the other hand, there's electoral organizing that's focused on building electoral power, electing officials, ballot measures, et cetera, and then poo-pooed community organizing. And so they were kind of opposed to one another. So the idea of integrated voter engagement was trying to bring those two together in a seamless strategy for building power. And so not typically community organizing, if we were involved in electoral politics, we would be involved in an election, we win or lose, we go back to what we were doing before in community organizing, and then a year later, it's a new election. So it's kind of start and stop. So what we tried to do was develop a strategy that was seamless. The elections were a part of power building, and that wasn't to win or lose, that wasn't the end. You build a base of people, a base of voters, a base of leaders, so that the next election that comes along, you're more powerful. As a result of that election, your community organizing will be more powerful, et cetera. So it's integrating these two strategies in a way that was complementary and seamless and not competitive.
So this makes so much sense to me as to why you bounce back so quickly. when there's a big campaign, and whether you win or lose that campaign, you are even Steven. You're never too high, you're never too low. And I'm hearing you say it's because it's not about just one single election. It's not about just one single race. So I want to sort of get your assessment, if you will. How do you think the field is doing on breaking the silos, on its stick-with-itness, through the ebbs and flows of the wins and the losses? What's your analysis? What grade do you give the field?
I think we've made progress on that, because part of the never getting too high and too low is about strategy and thinking 3 steps ahead. And part of the power analysis was to try to encourage people to think that way, not just about the immediate battle rather, but what's the next step toward transformative change. I think we made progress, but I think still, when you get in the heat of battle, it's very easy to become myopic and narrowly focused and only think about that battle. And then the day after the battle is over, win or lose, then you start thinking about something for the future. And what we've encouraged people to do is to develop a a longer frame, thinking 3 steps ahead, and place any particular battle in a larger strategy for winning transformational power.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, Anthony, because I often talk to nonprofit organizations around the issue of fundraising and sustainability, as you know. And one of the things that I'm always coaching nonprofits to do is to situate a journey, that their work exists within a broader landscape, and that landscape exists within a broader time horizon. There's a journey to the work. And that the journey is what should be communicated to funders as you're trying to pitch whatever it is that you're doing. So I'm hearing you talk about power building in the same way, that there's a journey to it, there's a time horizon to it, and to be able to sort of situate one election into the overall journey is really the ability to, as you're describing, sort of think and strategize 3 or 4 steps ahead.
Well, I think that's right, and as you say, Casey, part of the battle here is also to get funders to think a different way. Because in some sense, why community-based organizations get into this short-term tactical is because that's the way funding works.
That's right.
You're funded for a year at a time. They're crafting a proposal that's pretty tactical, and at the same time, they expect you to change the world in a year. Right? So pushing back against that notion and trying to get them to think about a broader horizon. If you really want to achieve transformational change, yes, these battles are important, but they're part of the context of a process, a journey, as you say, toward that transformational change. So if one piece of the puzzle is getting organizations to think differently, the same thing is true of getting funders to think differently.
I mean, that was really the value proposition of the California Black Freedom Fund, was to
That's right.
was to establish it as a 5-year effort intentionally to create the kind of time horizon, to give the strategy sort of time to develop and to help to set funder sights, on a longer time horizon than just sort of the short-term ebbs and flows that had been very historical. And what funders essentially do is fund humanitarian crises. You come in, you drop a lot of money, and then you're out. And you hope things get better. And what you really helped the funders to see and begin to embrace with the Freedom Fund was that there needed to, from the beginning, to set it up as a longer-term journey.
Well, that's right, and as you know, even 5 years is still pretty short. But it was a good start. It was getting to think from a year at a time to 5 years, and hopefully we'll get to think 2 years, 10 years, and beyond. But yeah, that our goal was to try to establish a paradigm shift. To what degree we've actually done that, we'll have to see.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. You gave a grade to the nonprofit sector. How do you grade funders?
C.
A C. Okay. Average. Okay. Could be better. Could be worse. Yeah. What are they doing right? Tell us what are funders doing right?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think obviously one, the fact that they actually invested in the California Black Freedom Fund was a step forward, which is different than the one before. There are also other instances. There's a Latino Power Fund. There's the Pivot Fund.
Right.
Those other efforts now happening that are more long-term and not just the 1 year short-term tactical silos. So that's good. One thing we knew at the California Black Freedom Fund is that 3 years in, people's attention is going to wane, and it has begun to wane. And so part of the challenge now is to recommit them, reinvigorate them to that longer-term vision of long-term power building, and Black power building in particular, and multiracial power building in general. So there's been progress, and there are a few other efforts. But have we made the cultural shift, the paradigm shift? Not quite yet.
Not quite yet. That's what we still need to work toward. How do we get there, Anthony? How do we move from opening eyes to new ways of thinking to embodying the transformation?
Changing habits is hard. Any kind of habit is hard. So part of what's necessary is consistency. And so part of the importance of the California Black Freedom Fund is to provide that consistency, interaction with the funders to remind them again and again and again, this is not short term, this is long term. The importance of Black folks in this equation, I mean, one thing I didn't say before in answering the question earlier about why Black people, when you look at any struggle in California of significance, who has led that way? It's been Black people, from a voting point of view, from a leadership point of view. So to embrace that is an important part of the message that we're trying to send to people. So consistency, building a power block is important in terms of changing habits. And yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
So I mentioned, thank you for that, Anthony. This is all things that we need to hear, and we need to your point, have consistently reinforced, as we're doing the work. It's easy sometimes, as you say, to get myopic. It's easy sometimes to think about building our own organizational empires. It's easy sometimes to get frustrated and, quite honestly, lose hope, when you see all of the opposition that you're up against. And so just to hear you, continue to encourage us in this work, I think is really helpful and important. I mentioned earlier that people refer to you as legend. I've heard people call you Godfather. I call you Sensei. And I'm always curious, how do you actually refer to yourself? And what is it that you want people to remember most about your leadership?
Well, first, I never really refer to myself. I leave that to other people.
I say, you let us do that.
Yes.
Right. I remember at one point, one of my colleagues, I was working on something with them, and they said, "You're getting pretty good at this organizing, integrated engagement piece. What's your goal? What do you want to be?" And I said, "I want to get to a point where I can be there without being there." And so what that means is that through the leadership that I've exercised, the folks that I've trained, the new leaders that have come up, will engender the key parts of what I've tried to do with my life, and I don't have to be there. So that's my goal. To be there without being there is one piece. Second thing, I'm known for rigor and discipline.
Yes, you are.
I think that's important. Our movement is very passionate, and this is what I got from the Black Panther Party. Very, very passionate. And passion is an important ingredient to struggle and winning. It's not the only ingredient.
Right.
If we can't combine that passion with rigor and discipline, we also oftentimes find ourselves outmaneuvered and losing. So passion and discipline, rigor, analysis and strategy, and I want to be remembered most of all for living a life of purpose that tries to balance being audacious and being humble.
I really like this conversation about rigor and discipline and what's needed for organizers. You've trained so many organizers, and I'm curious to know, what do you feel is needed for the next generation of organizers and power builders? How are you helping to create the conditions for the next frontier of sustainable organizing? And also just thinking about, what are the new tension points in organizing and organizers that we should be thinking about, and how we truly have sustainable organizing?
Well, to start there first with the tension point. So one of the tension points with new, young, up-and-coming organizers is this question of healing and trauma and sustainability.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the number one question that young organizers always ask me: how do you last?
Yeah.
How have you
Talk
stayed
about
this
it.
so long?
Yeah.
And it's become a big thing. And in the past, old school, we used to think about organizing as like a boot camp
Yes.
and sacrifice. And if you're down, then you don't worry about all that stuff. I think I certainly have learned that there are limits to that, and that the need for healing is important. We all experience trauma both in our lives and also in the work itself that we have to pay attention to, and then we have to figure out. I think one of the horizons is really creating sustainable organizations and organizers. I used to tell my organizers that of the 10 people that I train, 2 or 3 will stick with it, and 7 will go. That's not a very good margin. So I think that there's things that we can learn about creating sustainable organizing and organization that can improve that, so that people can do this work over the long term. That's one of the horizons, I think, I spend quite a bit of my time these days
Yeah.
talking to young leaders and emerging to young leaders, because I think it's important for leaders like myself to step back and create space for new leaders to emerge. And so one thing I want to do is help that happen. And as you know, Felicia, one of the experiments we're trying now is something called the I Center,
Yes.
soon to be called Movement, Innovation, and Collective or Collaborative, that's trying to figure out building more power-building infrastructure so that people can learn how to innovate, how to strategize together, how to make inroads on healing justice, sustainable work culture to contribute that to the movement itself.
Yeah.
That's absolutely necessary work.
I want to, if you don't mind, Anthony, stick on this theme a little bit about sort of the future and the next generation and sort of what's on the horizon, if you will. I always like to ask this question, and because I think it's an important one, and that is, what are we not paying attention to right now that in 5 years we will wish we had?
That's a very good question. I think continuing on this same conversation, I do think paying attention to how to create more sustainable organizations is something that if we don't pay attention to now, we're going to regret, because we burn organizers out, we burn organizations out, and as I said earlier, our opposition is serious. They're not conceding anything from us. And while we think that we've made progress around diversity and equity and inclusion, they're pushing back on all of that. And so we're going to need these sustainable organizations and sustainable organizers ready to deal with that. And so if we don't pay attention to that now, we'll regret it later. And I have to say that many of my colleagues are kind of reacting in my mind in a negative way. I mean, my peers, they try to defend the old way of doing things. And I think there's some things that we can learn from the old way of doing things. There's also some things we can learn not to do from the way we've done things in the past. And so that's going to be important for us to learn for the future as well.
Give me some examples, if you don't mind. What are some things that we need to unlearn?
I think, for example, this boot camp mentality that used to be you become an organizer. When I first joined the Black Panther Party, I was a foot soldier. I wasn't a leader, I was a foot soldier. And they told me, shut up and learn. And
Right.
you haven't been around long enough to have an opinion about things. And that was part of the organizing culture, not just the Black Panther Party, organizing in general. It comes out from Alinsky. So I think that's a problem. I think everyone has something to contribute. I think the flip side of that is that young folks think they know everything, and they don't know everything. But also they know some things. And so figuring out a methodology of organizing and training that does emphasize some things we think we know, but also it's open to new ideas and new experiences all around this theme of experimentation is one example. Another example has been, we used to have people work for poverty wages. And that was a sign of you being down with the movement. And that was not sustainable. People who have families left the movement because they couldn't survive on poverty wages and do the work itself. So I think we've changed. We will never, in my mind, be able to pay our market value, but we can pay salaries and benefits and create conditions so that people can sustain this work over time. And that's an important part to do as well.
Yeah. That sort of gets a little bit into the next question that I have for you, which is, when you imagine and think about the idea of what it means when we say thriving while Black, what images and possibilities come to your mind?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I see, well, let me first say, part of the condition of the California Black Freedom Fund was the atrophying and disappearance of Black-led and Black-serving organizations.
Yes.
Smaller and smaller and smaller, both Black-led and Black-serving. So thriving, to me, reverses that. And we see a thriving, bubbling cauldron of new organizations and new leaders that are organizing the community, figuring out how to build power, winning systemic change in a way that we might have done in the past that might have interfered. So that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing, is, again, based on what we just talked about, is a culture of sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
That Black folks are living lives of purpose and working hard and being rigorous in that purpose, but having joy and learning to be joyful and experience the joy of organizing and working with people for social change and changing the whole culture of Black organizing from something that is a sacrifice to something that is a vocation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm paying attention to is the sea change in leadership that is happening right now in philanthropy. We're seeing it in the nonprofit sector. These sort of long time leaders, their tenure is now up, and they are making shifts in terms of what they're doing next. And we are on the precipice of seeing a huge sea change in leadership. So the idea that you're putting forward and you're positing around creating a culture of sustainability, I think is necessary to inoculate us from what happens when we have a huge sea change in leadership, that we have to start all over again. But if we have a culture of sustainability, then we don't have to do that starting and stopping over and over and over again. And I think that we would do well and be wise to start to really embrace a culture of sustainability, because it's also building in the next generation of leaders who are going to take over. This is also part of succession planning. This is all necessary to keep us from having to start from scratch every single time a leader transitions.
I think you're so right. That is essential. And part of that culture change is in the leaders themselves. Oftentimes, folks in my generation don't pay attention to succession planning. They may have peers or I'm not sure what the word is, followers. They have followers, but not evolving leaders. And they resist. They want to stay in power forever and don't recognize that transitions are inevitable. And that if we want to really build a sustainable, powerful movement, you've got to pay attention to succession planning. You've got to make space, step back, step aside. Doesn't mean you're not relevant anymore. Doesn't mean it's not a role you have to play in the movement. It's a different role than you might have played in the past. And that's something that, on the one hand, my peers have got to learn and embrace. And the same thing is true of the younger folks coming up, that there's something, we don't know nothing. There's something you can learn from us, and something we can learn from you as well. And so that dynamic, I think, is an important thing to nurture.
Well, no one can ever accuse you of not knowing how to step back. That is for sure. Because like I said, it is difficult to get Anthony in a room, and folks know that you exist, that you're there. To your point earlier, you want to be there without being there. I think you have successfully mastered how to do that. And one of the things that you talked about discipline and rigor, and that is so true about you. But I think what people often don't also understand about you is how playful you are, how disciplined you are, even in how you unwind, And so I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit, how do you relax? How do you unwind? How do you sort of keep life in a healthy balance for yourself?
The main thing that I love to do is I love nature. I love the mountains. And so I plan in the course of my year time to get away and go in the mountains and just be with nature again to replenish myself. And it hasn't always been that way. There was a time in my life where I felt that you got to work 24/7. If you're not working 24/7, you're not really dedicated to the movement itself. And I know now that harms me. I'm not my best self if I work that way. And I'm a much better person if I do take the time to relax, replenish, to enjoy the things that I enjoy. So I do that a lot. And that's been a big change for me. But that's also, when people ask longevity, that's a key part of how I've lasted. If I had worked the way I used to work, I would have had a heart attack, or been burnt out, or something. a long time ago. And so having that joy, in my case, it's the outdoors. Other people might be dance, it might be music, it might be other things. Finding that joy in your life is important. When young folks ask me, well, how can I stay in this work and sustain? And I say two things. On the one hand, yes, you have to find your balance. But the reality is that balance is not 9 to 5. Anybody who wants to excel at something has to put the work in. If you're a great athlete or violinist or gymnast, but you have to find balance there. So balance doesn't mean 9 to 5 and then you go do your thing, nor does it mean working 24/7 till you burn yourself out. You got to find your balance that meets your needs and your family needs and who you are to sustain yourself in the work.
Wow, these are words of wisdom. I appreciate them, and I think that
Good
that's
reminders.
Yeah, good reminder, and that there was a point in which you understood that you needed to practice self-care and to work differently. Are there other words of wisdom that you would want to share with us? Anything that you would want someone to know? If you leave the planet tomorrow, you've given us a lot of gems today already, but is there something else you would want us to know?
I would just repeat again, something that's evolved over the last several years for me as a theme is audacity and humility. Being audacious to try not to settle for a small incremental change or just what you can get, but to push the envelope is something that we need to do to arrive at the kind of transformative change we want. And at the same time, humility, knowing that it's an experiment. I don't know everything. We will make mistakes, and making mistakes is fine as long as you learn from those mistakes and carry forward to the next experiment itself. So humility and audacity is the thing that I've tried to balance in my life.
I love that.
Well, you have certainly been audacious in the ways in which I tell people some of the most progressive campaigns that we've had in the state of California, you have been the mastermind behind. The fact that we now have, for the first time ever, a Black female mayor in Los Angeles, Anthony Thigpen is behind that campaign, And so I think the audacity of which you speak is evident in, you got the receipts, in other words, that's Anthony, right, to show that being audacious and humble, as you describe, is a winning strategy, and that as leaders who, like myself and Felicia, who are still, I think, in a lot of ways, we're seasoned, but we're also emerging in a lot of ways as leaders. And I think having the reminders that audacity is a winning strategy is something, hearing from you, I think will really carry us forward, because we have a lot of audacious goals ourselves. And sometimes we feel intimidated by our own audacity. But to hear you say, no, that's okay. That's the way you should show up. Show up audacious, show up humble, show up knowing that you're going to have to experiment and try some things, and some things are going to work amazingly well, and some things are going to be a big flop, and be okay with that. Don't get too high, don't get too low. Think long term, think 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. Keep it all sort of integrated in terms of there's not one single thing that's going to change the needle. Just hearing you put it all in perspective, I think, for me, is really encouraging as a leader.
Absolutely.
The other thing I would say that kind of capitalizes all of that is that the path we're on is not a straight line. There will be ups and downs. There will be dashes forward and then reverses. And so keeping that in mind, and I tell young organizers all this all the time, that's how you keep perspective, where you don't get too high and get too low. There's not a straight line. But I do believe, speaking of the question earlier about hope, I still believe that the arc of history bends toward justice. It's not automatic. It's not predetermined. It could go a different way, but it bends that way. And as long as that's my hope, and that's what I see, and I see that in the work that we do and the potential of the work that we do.
Love that.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony. This has been, like I said, a real treat for us, because We know how influential you've been in our sector and in our field, how much people not only look to your wisdom, but really have used the tools that you have created to understand power, to engineer power, and to fight really important battles that prior to their engagement in the work that you've helped to pioneer didn't feel winnable, didn't feel achievable. And the way that you've helped us to think about coalition building, to be okay with being down for our folks, and also recognizing that none of us can do it alone, that we need to be in strategic alliance with one another. It's just such an impactful life that you have lived and a legacy that you have laid for all of us. So we really, really appreciate who you are, and we really are grateful for the time that you've given us this morning.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment, and it's glad to be with you. I'm happy to be with you.
All right. Well, we have a little, before we go, we have a couple of fun questions for you because, like I said, you are lighthearted. So just a couple of things that we call this or that. Okay?
Okay.
All right. And you can do them rapid fire. One is breakfast or dinner?
Dinner.
Dinner. Okay. Well, I think we know the answer to this, but for the sake of asking it again, mountains or ocean view?
Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Camping or glamping?
Camping.
Camping. Okay. And your favorite holiday?
My favorite holiday? That's a good question. My favorite holiday is Christmas
Mm-hmm.
because I normally take between Christmas and New Year's to spend a week up in the snow.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. And do you have a favorite quote?
Favorite quote? There's a favorite quote, although I can't quote it. There's a book by Robert, this guy named Robert Allen called Black Awakening in Campus America.
Mm-hmm.
And in the foreword, he talks about the nature of the movement. And he talks about the valleys and the peaks and the valleys, the starts and the stops, the forward motion and reverses. And so I always keep that in mind because it keeps me centered. Again, not to get too high, to get too low, because that's the nature of struggle.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
So where's your next campsite? Where are you going next?
That's a good question. Probably Sequoia National Park.
Yeah. And nobody
Wow.
shuts down like Anthony. Like his out of office this email is disabled. Try again
Oh.
in 7 days.
And no crisis can move you? When you're on that mountain, you really are on that mountain.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. I love it.
Well, we thank you for being on the mountain with us today, Anthony. It's so good to
Yes.
see you. So good, again, just to be in conversation and community with you always. We appreciate you. You are sensei forever for us.
Yes, indeed.
Well, my pleasure.
Subscribe to Thriving While Black on Apple Podcast, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, or YouTube for monthly episodes featuring interviews with the people who lead foundational change for our community and continue to build the next generation of change makers.